Imagine you're an ambitious 14th century Ottoman sultan. You have lands, you have enemies, and you have an army made of Turkish nobles who are, to put it mildly, conditionally loyal. They'll fight for you, sure, but they also might get ideas about who should really be in charge. This is a classic management problem. So, what's the solution? Murad came up with an answer so logical and so profoundly messed up it could only work. Instead of relying on ambitious nobles, why not create a new army from scratch? An army with no family ties, no land, no local allegiances. An army loyal only to you. And the best place to get recruits with no ties to the Ottoman power structure? Simple, you steal them. This system was called the devirme, the gathering. It was a child levy, a human tax imposed on the Christian Balkan subjects of the empire. Periodically, Ottoman officers would roll into villages in places like Serbia, Greece, or Albania and pick out the brightest, strongest boys, usually between the ages of 8 and 14. These kids were then taken to Constantinople, forcibly converted to Islam, and put through the most intense educational and military brainwashing program ever conceived. They learned to be soldiers, administrators, and engineers. They were forbidden to marry. Their only father was the Sultan. Their only family was their core. It was a brilliant, ruthless piece of human engineering designed to create the perfect servant of the state, utterly dependent on and loyal to the man on the throne. Here's the bizarre part. For a very long time, this was considered a fantastic opportunity. Yes, they were technically slaves of the Sultan, kul in Turkish, but these slaves got regular salaries, paid in cash 4 times a year. They wore immaculate uniforms, lived in comfortable barracks, and received the best education possible. A talented Janissary could rise to become a general, a governor, even the Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in the empire. For a poor Christian farmer's son in a forgotten corner of the Balkans, the devizne was a terrifying abduction that could also be a lottery ticket to unimaginable power. It's a real testament to how bad things were elsewhere that being kidnapped by a foreign empire was seen by some as a solid career move. Every military unit needs a symbol. Roman legions had eagles. Knights had banners. The Janissaries had a soup part. I am not kidding. Their unit standard was a massive bronze cauldron, the kazan. Soup was central to their identity. Accepting the Sultan's soup was a sign of loyalty. Refusing it meant you were displeased. And if the Janissaries were truly angry, they would overturn their cauldrons in the middle of the street. This was the official signal for a rebellion. It's maybe the most passive-aggressive declaration of war in history. They were spiritually guided by the Bektashi order of Sufi mystics, which gave them a unique, almost cult-like cohesion that separated them from the rest of society. For about 200 years, this absolutely bonkers system worked perfectly. The Janissaries were the first modern standing army in Europe. They were the first infantry to make widespread, effective use of firearms, equipped with massive matchlock muskets, while European knights were still clanking around in armor. They were disciplined, fearless, and the tip of the Ottoman spear that conquered everything from Hungary to Egypt. At battles like Varna, Chaldiran, and Mohacs, they weren't just soldiers, they were a force of nature, a tide of gunpowder and steel that shattered medieval armies. The whole point of the system was to create a flawless military machine, and for a glorious century or two, that's exactly what they were. And then, because humans are involved, it all started to go wrong. The rules started to bend. First, the ban on marriage was relaxed. Suddenly, Janissaries had wives, and more importantly, they had children. And what do you do when you have a kid? You want to get them a good job. A job like, say, being a Janissary. So they started enrolling their own sons, completely destroying the original idea of an outside recruitment pool with no vested interests. The devirme system faded away by the late 17th century. Now, being a Janissary wasn't something you were forced into, it was a birthright. A cushy, privileged, and increasingly lazy birthright. Once they became a hereditary caste of kingmakers, things got really messy. Their loyalty to the Sultan became optional. They were no longer the Sultan's slaves, the Sultan was their hostage. If a sultan tried to implement reforms they didn't like, or short them on pay, they'd just overturn the soup pots. In 1622, they murdered the young, reform-minded Sultan Osman II. He was the first of many. They developed a taste for deposing rulers. The Janissaries went from being the guardians of the throne to the most dangerous threat to anyone sitting on it. Imagine your own bodyguards deciding they get to vote on all your decisions, and a no vote involves a sword. By the 18th and early 19th centuries, the Janissaries were less of an army and more of a deeply entrenched, profoundly conservative social club with weapons. They were also terrible soldiers. While European armies were professionalizing with new tactics, drills, and technology, the Janissaries resisted all change. Any sultan who suggested modernizing the army was met with a violent rebellion. Why? Because proper training and discipline would threaten their business interests and comfortable lifestyles. They had become a powerful veto bloc against the empire's survival. They were a military institution that actively prevented the military from getting better. It's a level of institutional decay that is almost beautiful in its perfection. Enter Sultan Mahmud II. He came to the throne in 1808, and he knew perfectly well that the empire was going to die unless he could break the Janissaries. But every ruler who had tried that before him ended up dead. So he played the long game. For years, he patiently consolidated power and planted loyalists in key positions. Then, in secret, he started building a new army, a modern, European-style army called the Asakiri Mansurei Muhammadiyeh, the victorious soldiers of Muhammad. He trained them with modern weapons, dressed them in modern uniforms, and most importantly, kept it all very, very quiet. He was essentially building the instrument of the Janissaries' destruction right under their noses. In June 1826, Mahmud II finally made his move. He publicly announced the formation of his new army. As expected, the Janissaries went berserk. They overturned their cauldrons and marched on the palace, fully expecting the Sultan to back down like all the others. They were wrong. This time, Mahmud was ready. He unfurled the sacred banner of the Prophet Muhammad, calling all true Muslims to defend the Sultan against the rebels. His new, loyal artillery corps rolled cannons into position and bombarded the Janissary barracks, which were then stormed by his new troops. The public, sick of the Janissaries' corruption, joined in. It wasn't a battle, it was an extermination. Thousands were killed. Thousands more were executed or exiled. It became known as the Auspicious Incident. In a single bloody afternoon, a 460-year-old institution was wiped from the face of the earth. The Sultan issued decrees officially dissolving the corps. Their name was forbidden. Their Bektashi spiritual order was suppressed. Their graves were desecrated. The state engaged in a systematic effort to erase them from history. It was a profoundly brutal and necessary act of political surgery. The Ottoman Empire had finally removed the tumor that was killing it. Of course, this didn't magically solve all the empire's problems. Getting rid of your Praetorian Guard doesn't fix a crumbling economy or stop nationalism. But it was a start. It was the brutal, bloody end to one of history's most fascinating and flawed experiments in creating the perfect soldier. An experiment that proved that even the most brilliantly designed systems are no match for human nature. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!